Another Final Fantasy has been conquered for the Final Fantasy Platinum series. And what is the Platinum series, you may ask? It's where we go and play every single available Final Fantasy on PlayStation. We play it. Most importantly, we enjoy our time with it. We complete it, we roll credits, and we do everything the game has to offer. And then we will pop that platinum trophy. Then I'll take all of that experience, roll it into one big ball, and throw it to you in a form of a video much like this one. And in today's video, we're going to be going over Final Fantasy XIII. So with that being said, what is up guys, Jen here, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel. As always, got your quarter timestamps down below, so if you want to skip to a certain section, feel free to do so. All I ask is you to support the channel and hit that like button. And if you want to stick around for some more Final Fantasy content, then please consider hitting that subscribe button. So Final Fantasy XIII. In a nutshell, I really enjoyed my time this time with Final Fantasy XIII, but before we dive into all of the goodness of Final Fantasy XIII and some of the bad, I want to talk about my history with Final Fantasy XIII because I think it's quite important. I got Final Fantasy XIII on release. You'll see in the trophy list a little bit later that I popped my first trophy on the day of release, then popping my final trophy 15 years later. But the reason why it's took me so long is because I've never actually completed Final Fantasy XIII until this playthrough. I got to chapter 11, and at the end of chapter 11, there's a boss called Barthanulus. It's the second time you face him, and I thought, I've beat him once, I can beat him again, no problem. But this was a test of all my abilities, and I failed. I failed again. I kept on failing, and I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And I think around this time, Red Dead Redemption came out. So I shifted my focus and I left Final Fantasy XIII until I picked it up again for the Platinum series. So it truly is a redemption run for me here. And like I have said, this was an awesome experience, and I really dig Final Fantasy XIII. I never disliked it in the first place. I just couldn't beat a boss, and I moved on. This time, now that I've experienced everything it has to offer, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that Final Fantasy XIII is one of the best Final Fantasies out there. If you think that's a bit of a statement, then please feel free to comment in the comment section down below, because I would love to have a conversation. But let's dive in to Final Fantasy XIII, and we'll start off with its story. Now I've got Final Fantasy XIII right here. I had to dust off the PlayStation 3 to play this, but I think it's only fitting for the story setup that we read the synopsis on the back of the box art. Do you have the courage to face your destiny? As a deepening crisis threatens to plunge the floating world of Cocoon into chaos, a band of unsuspecting strangers find themselves branded as enemies of the state, with the panicking population baying for their blood and the military all too happy to oblige. They have no choice but to run for their lives. Join them on a desperate quest to challenge the forces controlling their fate and prevent untold destruction. Now that is quite the synopsis for Final Fantasy XIII, and I've got to say, with experience the story, it definitely lived up to that, and I'll tell you why. Now there's going to be a thing that I'm going to say it right now. The data logs. I read every single one of these as they came in. Each chapter recap that came in, I read it and refreshed myself with all the terminology in Final Fantasy XIII, and it indeed did add to my experience of understanding the story and ultimately loving the story for what it is. Now a lot of you might say, well, we shouldn't have to read the data log. The story should be presented to us in full. We shouldn't have to go out our way. And to a certain extent, I do agree with that, but reading these data logs did enhance the story and really made me to love it. They offer an in-depth insight to the world of Final Fantasy XIII. Now I know that Final Fantasy XIII then trails off into two other games to complete its trilogy, but looking at Final Fantasy XIII as it is, the story is all there and is pretty engaging. There might be terms, fal'Cie, l'Cie, I don't know what to see. There's so many words here. My advice would be to read those data logs and enjoy enjoy it. Yes, it's a little bit of reading. There isn't many NPCs or towns to go to get this lore. Just take it as it is, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it just as much as I did. Something that I didn't expect to enjoy as much as I did, but I did, is the characters. Now, the characters and the story of Final Fantasy XIII is the crux of Final Fantasy XIII. All of its gameplay and its layout, its chapters is based around this, and that can be both a positive and a negative. We'll go over those factors as we get round to it. But with the characters, with the way that we get introduced to the characters and spend time with them independently in each chapter and get to know them, get to see those relationships build up, Final Fantasy XIII does an incredible job, and it establishes the relationships and it makes you care.
This is goodbye.
Yes, there are moments throughout the story where they could have done a little bit better with the characters, because sometimes they can be a little bit one-dimensional, but all in all, I enjoyed the characters. Now, that was just the main cast. There are many sub-characters in Final Fantasy XIII that I wish got a little bit more time, and I do think we should have got more Cid Raines. I do think we should have got more of Roche and Jill and all of those bad guys that we come across, because they just have the little moments, but they have backstory supporting them. There's cutscenes that lead up to introducing them, and then they're just gone in the wind. I wish they did a little bit more.
What if they told you it's a trick?
You must be Snowvillians. Yag Roche, Psychom Division. I understand your plight. However, the Pulse threat is not so easily dismissed.
And then there's the big bad Barthanulus. This guy I despise because I couldn't get past him back in the day at chapter 11, but as the way he is written, I did despise him. I did not like this douchebag whatsoever, and I guess that's a credit to the writing because he is the bad guy. I'm supposed to not like him, but he was a very different bad guy for Final Fantasy, but a bad guy nonetheless. Now, with story and characters out the way, let's talk about the world of Final Fantasy XIII. I'm going to get this point out the way. Final Fantasy XIII can feel linear. It has a lot of corridors that you are going down. There are a lot of one routes and no optional directions to go in. But this falls into play when it comes to supporting the story, and this is a negative on Final Fantasy XIII. Though there are places that you come across where you do have different routes to go through and different things to do, and of course when you hit chapter 11 and everything opens up, it feels like a different game. But for the most point, you are going from point A to B, and the story through that A to B is the strong suit and not the gameplay and its exploration. I personally got what I needed out of each section as I was playing through the game. Yes, I didn't do side quests straight off the bat because there were none. I had to wait till later in the game, but what I got, I enjoyed. Hitting chapter 11 is a game changer for Final Fantasy XIII. Seeing the step and how open that world is really blew my mind, and visually on the PlayStation 3, it still looks fantastic. I do think that Final Fantasy XIII would have been better in all aspects if they had more NPCs to interact with and towns to visit to catch up and revisit some of the lore that you've experienced. The NPCs that you do get to come across, mainly during the Eden stuff and towards the beginning of the game, is really well done. It really builds up the suspense and tells you what's going off around you, and I just wish there was more of it.
With you later if you want to join us.
Now on to gameplay exploration, and as I mentioned, there's a few curiosities here and there along the way, a few chests that you'll come across just because they are on your path, and there are a few that you do need to venture off the beaten path to find. But again, chapter 11, it opens up, we get the side quests, we get more chests to open, we have to do certain things to reach other chests, we have to get a chocobo. I felt that that moment came at the right time because you were so used to this A to B moment, getting story, visiting a character, doing a chapter as another character, two characters meet up, you get to play as those characters, watch their character relationship build, move on to the next two characters, and then they all meet up in chapter 11, and then boom, it just all explodes, and you are open to your own decisions.
Let's go.
Now, Final Fantasy XIII doesn't really have any dungeons, and I wish it did, because there was a certain place in Chapter 11 called Tasion's Tower, and this had a few mechanics that made dungeons fun. Yes, they had mandatory side quests to do, but the way that you traverse this dungeon was much different to the dungeons you did before. And when I say dungeons, I'm on about like little parts of the map that felt like you're going into a cave or you're going through a factory. But Tasion's Tower showed me the potential of what could have been when it comes to dungeons. From exploration to combat, and Final Fantasy XIII does combat incredibly different, but I want to say straight off the bat that auto battler Final Fantasy XIII isn't it. Yes, for most of the fodder you can probably auto battle and be fine, but to really get grips and be a master of its systems, you need to dive in a little bit deeper. And once you've found those systems, Final Fantasy's paradigm shift system is pretty damn incredible. It's intense to mess around with, and there were some moments when I was streaming this where things really rose the roof and we celebrated when a battle was won because the strategy was executed to perfection. So paradigms, it's a very loose job system type thing. You have many roles that you can mess around with, whether you're attacking with physical attacks, magical attacks, you're debuffing, you're buffing, you're healing, or you're tanking. It's all here, and it's all up to you to decide how to mix and match and what's best suited to your situation. Now, I said it's fast and snappy, but that first paradigm shift, not so much. The amount of game overs I probably lost to this because I waited till the last minute to do it and then realized, uh-oh, I have to sit through this animation. Man, we need that snappy animation straight off the bat. Talking about game overs, party leader dies, it's game over. I really wish, and I will mention this a couple of times throughout the video, that if they decide to remaster Final Fantasy XIII and make it accessible on modern platforms to everyone, that a few things like party members dying, having the animation so long on your first paradigm shift will be changed. It'll be nice to be able to shift what character you're controlling on the fly, a little bit like 7 Remake, but in a turn-based ATB kind of way. I'm sure it can be done, and I think it could make battles even more exhilarating when you have the full control of all of your characters on the fly. But yeah, getting a game over when your party leader dies? Gotta say, didn't like that when it happened, and I know it's probably my fault, but it's a game over nonetheless. There were many satisfying combos pulling off here with the paradigm system when you really dive into it, and we'll go into the story progression again here with Final Fantasy XIII and its battle system. But when you get the swing of it, when you get what mixes matches really well, when you use a Libroscope and rely on your AI to use the right attacks and have the right shifts at the right time, battles are incredible, especially during the end chapters. And I know I keep saying it gets better at the end chapter. I think Final Fantasy XIII was incredible from the start all the way to the finish, but when you hit that chapter 11, things can blow your mind quite a bit. And the paradigm shifts and getting really into the nitty-gritty was a damn treat. Not only that, I decided to dive into more of the combat systems. So I used abilities, I used Quake, I used Renew when it was needed so I could focus attack on DPS, and I'm talking about that Barthanulus fight. When that Doom counter went on, I went all out with all attacks, but I had no healers. Having Renew and having some TP spare to do that really kept that flow going, and it worked for quite a few battles as well. Quake was great when you preempted some stronger monsters and wanted to stagger them all at the same time. Using Libra was quite effective, so the AI knows what to attack, because as soon as Libra does what it needs to do, your AI knows what to attack it with, so it makes those battles with these enemies for the first time a lot easier. And last but not least, there's summons. There's a great system here for summons, but I didn't find myself diving into it too much. Odin got me out of a lot of sticky situations, that much is true, but when it came to the other summons, I didn't really rely on them too much. I use Vanille's summon quite a bit because there's a certain poison trick, because poison works a little bit differently in Final Fantasy XIII, where I bided a lot of time using Vanille's summon, but I didn't really use her summon for her summon capabilities. I just used it so it passed the time, so poison did its damage. So I would like to probably revisit the summons at a later date and see what they're really about, but I didn't find myself needing to use them. I'll mention it a few times. Story progression, gating a lot of the systems in Final Fantasy XIII, and the Crystarium is one of them. Why would you do this? I still don't know to this day. I love my Final Fantasies when I can grind and spend a couple of hours in a really good grind spot and get ahead of the game so I can have smooth sailing and get straight into the end game content. But with Final Fantasy XIII, I can't do that. I couldn't do it at all. It was gated by story progression. Once again, another fact of Final Fantasy XIII being very reliant on its story and its characters being the crux of the game instead of its gameplay and the gameplay following that. If you just unlocked all of that, I think there would be a lot more people praising it. But the Crystarium in itself as an upgrade system, it's like a lamer sphere grid. It just felt like a chore to go through. The fact that I had to hold X for a long time, it might be a small complaint to some, but it didn't really feel like I was upgrading. It felt like it was something that was supposed to happen when you level up, but you're doing it manually as opposed to the game doing it for you. I don't know. It's just a bit of a weird one, and it wasn't its strongest suit. Then we have weapons and accessories. I really wish that there was a 3D weapon viewer for Final Fantasy XIII here, because there's so many weapons. Each weapon that you get has a secondary upgrade, and they're all different, and they look incredible. Some of these designs look really nice, but you can't see them at all in battle because of the way the camera angle works, and you don't really have a focus on the weapons while you're attacking. You only see them briefly during the victory fanfare. And then of course you have your ultimate weapon, which is your third upgrade of all of the second upgrades. We'll talk about all these weapons a little bit later, I'm sure, when it comes to trophies, but there is a system in place. It's a very weird system. It felt like more of a chore. I guess that might be because I had to do it with every single weapon and every single accessory, but there's something there, and I just think it can be refined just a little bit. There are ways to get through this a little bit faster and make sure that you get the weapons with the less resources, but the fact that you don't get gil, that you get materials, that you sell for gil instead, it's a very convoluted system, and there's a few things that I would change personally. I would like to just get gil as opposed to having to sell materials, keep materials as the upgrade materials, and I think we would have had an easier time with its system and want to go into it a little bit more, but that's just me. So that's everything when it comes to combat. It's really exhilarating. Honestly, like when it came to the final battles, when I was doing the Lassie crystals and doing the Titan trials, having those paradigms locked in, having the right team, having the right weapons and accessories, the Genji glove really damn helped out, especially during the end game. It's really, really fun, but there's a few little things that just let it down ever so slightly. It doesn't cancel it all out, but at the same time, it doesn't really push it to its limits. So let's move on from combat and we'll dive into some of the side content. And yes, you've guessed it, to some people that might be too little, too late. This is where NPCs and towns would have come into play really nice for Final Fantasy XIII to break the chapters up a little bit more, maybe weave in some of that Lassie fallacy lore into NPCs and side quests between chapters, just so you can have a little bit of a break so you're not constantly going from A to B, because I found the Lassie crystals, even though they're just crystals, they're not NPCs, though if you read the lore that each of those crystals do and then the data logs that you unlock as you do them, it really adds to the experience of the overall story of Final Fantasy XIII. It is, again, too little too late. I found those side quests to be really damn good and a test of my abilities and knowledge of the game. We're finishing up now and I'm going to be talking about the music, and this is the first time that I've really just sat back and listened to the soundtrack of Final Fantasy XIII, hitting the step for the first time, getting the right angle and just listening to the music, staying on the title screen and listening to the promise, listening to the battle theme, even though I feel like the battle theme would have been a perfect candidate to have the classic Final Fantasy battle bassline, like this version from Final Fantasy Record Keeper. This soundtrack was incredible. I think Final Fantasy XIII is a very underrated soundtrack, and I have been listening it on repeat as I've been preparing for this video, as I've been between sessions of playing Final Fantasy XIII. It's a great soundtrack. Yes, they're lacking the main theme of Final Fantasy, a victory fanfare, the prelude, but what Final Fantasy XIII has to offer is such a nice soundtrack. Okay, here we are with the trophies. Now I have the trophies being scrolled through in the background, and you can see that I started my venture in 2010 and ended it in 2025. 15 years, well, it was just 1 year and then dropping it and then playing it again for like 3 months. But the experience of the Final Fantasy XIII Platinum, really not that bad at all. I was told that I'd be dreading the Treasure Hunter trophy in particular, but the trophies that you're going to get along the way, the chapter-based trophies, are going to be easy. As you get deeper into the game and its systems and you stagger more enemies, you can unlock even more trophies. As you go into the end game and do the side content, those trophies are all bunched together. But I think ultimately there was no trophies that I struggled with at all. The Treasure Hunter trophy, let's talk about that for a second. So I hit a point in chapter 12, I believe, before I completed the game or something along those lines, and there was these enemies called sacrificers, and you could spawn them really easily at a certain point of the chapter. If you progressed any further, it would be much more difficult to spawn them. So these dropped perfumes, and that was smelling awfully nice, and they also dropped an upgrade material for weapons and accessories, but because I was getting so many of them, I sold them for gil, so I ended up making about 8 million gil, and at the same time I was raking in all the Crystarium points as well. When it came to the actual Treasure Hunter grind, I just had to rely on a couple of drops here and there, and then I went for the technique of trading in all my Genji gloves and breaking one of Vanille's weapons down for the ultimate upgrade material, to then upgrade all of my weapons to their ultimate weapons, and then I just reloaded the save before I did that, and then focused everything that I needed to get me through 5-starring all the missions. It was really easy, really natural, and a lot of fun. I think the Crystarium is probably like the biggest grind, but when you're on the step and you see a behemoth fighting another monster and it's quite near to a save point, and when you run to that save point you realize that they respawn after you beat them, it's a great place to grind. It's probably the go-to. That's what got me all my Crystarium points. It probably took me about 3 hours of grinding to max out everybody. It was not a chore at all. I just went back to listen to that Final Fantasy XIII soundtrack. But all in all, the Final Fantasy XIII Platinum, the biggest struggle was dusting off the PlayStation 3, going through the speed of a PlayStation 3, waiting forever and ever for my trophies to sync on the PS3 to then pop the Platinum and make it online for you all to see and show that badge of approval that I did it. I Platinum Final Fantasy XIII, and I bloody well enjoyed it. Mission complete. Now, how do I get does the trophy pop automatically? Or do I need to go see the, there it is. Ultimate Hero! So there we have it. Final Fantasy XIII, the Platinum Trophy has been obtained. And again, I really did like my experience with Final Fantasy XIII. I think it should be respected. It seems to be one of those things with Final Fantasy that when it hits around 10 to 15 years of the game coming out, everyone starts to loving it again. I never hated Final Fantasy XIII. If anything, I love it even more, but I'm more interested to know your thoughts and opinions. Have you got the Platinum Trophy for Final Fantasy XIII? Are you waiting for a remaster so you don't have to dust off the PlayStation 3 to play Final Fantasy XIII? Let me know in the comment section below. I appreciate your time, and until next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.